And so I think those two views offer very different perspectives on human life, because the latter view is what, and you see the kind of development of Western philosophy that happens as a result of the latter view, because you suddenly, because think about it this way, man. you know Up until that point, up until kind of the Enlightenment and Renaissance, up until that point, uh, Christian values would inform morality in Europe, right? But once you do away with quote unquote revealed or revelation based set of values, you suddenly get a birth of Western philosophy that is moral but secular, right? Moral but uh, irreligious, or irreligious, if you like, right? And so, because suddenly it's a question of why should I do good, right? I mean, all of a sudden, because it begs that it's a very deep question in terms of, if there's no concept of afterlife, can't anybody get away with anything, right? If there's no sense of accountability, can you ultimately ever impose self-discipline, right? And then you have the Kants and the Hegels, and have your birth of, and then you have existentialism, and you have Jean-Paul Sartre, and Dostoevsky, and then within it, existentialism, you get the theistic version, and then the atheistic version with Sartre, and then the theistic version with Kierkegaard, which is one of his famous articles on Why Am I a Christian, and great piece. I think it was his PhD thesis. And so all of a sudden, then the moment you take out, in my view, the moment you take out the religious view, there's a vacuum that's created, and we start grappling with that vacuum of, now what do we do? Where do we get those values from? What are we standing on? Because faith ultimately, and I'm not saying faith is irrational. It's just that there is always a reason, there is always a rationality associated with it. It's just that it gives you an endpoint where you settle down, right? Because beyond a point, you're like, this is, this is revealed knowledge, right? So if I'm thinking about Christ, I can only think about him to a certain point, or I'm thinking about Virgin Mary, or I can only think about them to a certain point. Or if I'm thinking about the Prophet Muhammad, to think about a certain point, and then you kind of settle at that point, right? You don't go, kind of faith lets you settle down find a camping site where you can camp, right? Where you can say, okay, let me build my building off of that, because now these are a set of values that I'm going to take for granted, right? Quote unquote, I'm going to take them for granted. Once you take that out, then you're exactly right, man. I fully agree with that we're left in a vacuum where we're struggling with, it's like, because I feel that we start to go around in circles, because we define values, we come up with criteria for what those values should be, but then we're like, but ultimately, what is all of that based on, right? I mean, that is somebody's opinion, and then you have to kind of agree with, what's that ultimate criterion? Is it the utilitarian version of maximum good for the maximum number of people, or is it, the famous philosophical conundrums, man, of, if there's a guy who's trying to run and he enters your house, and people have been chasing him, would you lie, right? Is it okay to lie in that view? And then, is there a hierarchy of values? Is it more important to, I mean, you would rather save a life, right, than and not tell the truth in that case, right? Because it's more important to save life. But that question of, why is it more important to save life and not lie, right? Ultimately, if you take religion of any form out of there,
I would say
that
I would say
faith out of that burden falls on us, on our kind of little shoulders.
Well, it's ironic too. I mean, it's ironic, but maybe it makes perfect sense. Where Tolstoy ended in that book is faith. The only answer to the question of the meaning of life is faith. But at least the way I interpreted it, and we're always just interpreting it, and I respect this in some ways, he almost did it begrudgingly. Like, he didn't want it to be faith. He wanted to be able to understand it, but he came to very much the conclusion you're coming to, which is the only way this whole thing works, the only way we can continue to live, is if we have faith in something, that there's some reason we're doing this, there's some deeper meaning behind it. Because if we don't, if we keep just looking from that rationalistic view in the vacuum, you will drive yourself crazy. You will get to a point where he almost literally was going to commit suicide because he didn't have faith for a portion. And he came to this end point where he said, well, without faith, this is all meaningless. There's no basis on me doing anything, exactly as you're articulating. And he came to this conclusion that said, I must accept that there is some faith in this. And it makes me wonder, maybe I'll say this as we close, Jay-Z, like, it almost makes me wonder if it was more of a curse than a gift, the intellectual sophistication we've evolved to in our consciousness, because we can't know for sure. I think the best we can assume is that there does have to be some faith, as Tolstoy concluded. And it would be so much easier if we didn't have this ability, as we went through with the Renaissance and the Enlightenment, to start to question some of these things, because we don't know the answers. We won't come to the answers. We end up in the same place anyway, that we have to say, well, put the rational aside and just accept faith. I wonder if it's not more of a curse that we're more doomed to be able to think about all this stuff than anything else. But then the other side of it is, you and I are having this conversation, and it makes me happy, and I feel good. And I like that I have you in my life in this relationship, and I'll walk out of this with some sensation of goodness, which feels like, well, it can't be all gloom and doom. Then it can't be that we're doomed to this thinking mind. And I think that's where you're going with much of this, Jay-Z, is, think about as much as you can, but recognize the limits. And then allow that other piece, whether it be spiritual or faith or emotion or whatever you want to call it, allow that to exist and accept the fact that it just is what it is. I'm happy talking to you right now. Don't allow the fact that I don't know why there's any meaning to me talking to you to cloud that, right? Let those things exist.